This is Democracy Watch. Mark, this is a massive story that is inexplicably getting no media attention whatsoever. So we've spoken before about the low-key strategy that Republicans are employing to starve our elections by refusing to fund them. Biden's requested $134 million. Republicans, and this was in Congress to fund our elections, Republicans countered with $20 million. So if Republicans get their way, allocating $20 million instead of the $134 million, what would our election administration look like with only that amount in federal funding?
This is a national scandal, and how this is not on the front page of all of the national media is astounding to me. You know, the mainstream media says they care about democracy. Democracy dies in darkness. No, democracy dies when it has no money to run. Okay. And the fact is, the Republicans are systematically starving our election administrators so that they cannot run free and fair elections. This is only the latest example of them doing that. They, remember, in state after state, vilified counties that were getting voluntary donations in order from philanthropy in order to run elections, getting organizations who were organizing volunteers to become poll workers. Right? They starved it at the state level. Then, you know, the Republicans who always say, well, we need to make sure everything is fair everywhere. When it comes to federal funding, they are starving it there too. The only explanation why Republicans don't want there to be the budget necessary to run elections is because they don't want the election to run smoothly. They want there to be chaos. They want there to be problems because they want to make it harder to vote and easier to cheat. And the easiest way for Donald Trump to cheat is to say, well, look at how badly things ran. The equipment was broken. There weren't enough people. There was, you know, chaos at the polls. This is an absolute five-alarm fire scandal in American democracy right now, and everyone needs to wake up to it.
Perfectly put. Mark, even Biden's number, though, 134 million, does seem woefully inadequate. Like, we dump billions into our defense budget, for example. Why not fully fund our election administration and security, which, relatively speaking, is just a drop in the bucket, and is to protect our most fundamental right?
No, that's exactly right. I mean, the fact is, the number that is being requested is the White House trying to be unbelievably reasonable in trying to get the Republicans like an eighth of the way there, right? Like this is that number doesn't fully fund what we need. As you say, you know, 120, 130 million dollars is not nearly what is needed by our election officials. These officials are straining under cuts from counties, from Republican-controlled state legislatures, from just the increased cost of running elections generally, where you have an overlay of threat that is beating down on them. You know, Republicans, you see story after story about how Republicans are foiling these offices, making them spend money endlessly responding to requests for documents. So this number that the White House was seeking was not everything. It was a real effort and a genuine effort on their part to try to meet the Republicans, frankly, on the Republican side of the 50-yard line. And what Republicans have done instead is to spit in democracy's face. And we need to call them out. This is why Democracy Docket did put this on their front page. It is why we do cover this story extensively. It's why you and I cover this story every time there's something about this. But man, if people say they care about democracy, they need to wake up to this issue, because without money, you're not going to have free and fair elections.
Right. And by the way, this is why you don't offer any goodwill to Republicans, because, for example, you try to meet them, you know, at the 50-yard line and they bring it back to the 10. You know what I mean? So, like, what we need to do is just try to fully fund these elections and not try to offer them any goodwill or the benefit of the doubt, because what they're going to do at the end of the day is just completely, pervert the situation and exploit you for everything that you've got. You did mention that this was on the front page of Democracy Docket. That's where I found it. So for those watching right now, if you want to follow along with all of this stuff as soon as it breaks, please make sure to sign up. I'll put the link right here on the screen and also in the post description of this video. Mark, what is your message to those who are unsure whether this is really a fight that's worth fighting?
This is the fight of our generation. You know, this is not necessarily the fight that any of us would have wanted to take on. There are a lot of problems in the world, and I understand that. But I promise you that 20 years from now, when your children and your grandchildren come to you and they ask about this time, they are not going to ask you what the price of gas was. They are not going to ask you what your policy was on taxes or on international trade. They're going to want to know what you did in 2024 when democracy was at stake. Did you stand by and let it falter because Republicans refused to do a modicum of the decent and right thing? Or did you do everything in your power to make sure that democracy was protected? So, Brian and I, we talk constantly about the things that we could be doing to protect democracy, but each and every one of us need to do everything we can to not allow the cynics to win, not allow the Republicans to shift the Overton window so that we just throw up our hands and say, all is lost. All is not lost. We are still months from the election, and there is time for all of us. If you want to help this problem of funding, go down and become a volunteer to be a poll worker. Ask your election office what you can do to help to alleviate their problems. Stand up for democracy in your community. Make sure your towns and your counties are funding democracy. This is not going to be solved by Republicans at the congressional level, but we all have to do our part.
And by the way, call your member of Congress and demand that they fully fund the election. This is kind of one of those weird, nebulous, process issues that they probably don't get a lot of pressure on. And so your calls make an impact. So just make sure to call your member of Congress. Make sure that our elections are fully funded, not the $20 million that Republicans are offering, probably not even the $130 million that the president's requesting. Fully fund these elections. Mark, talk about the mechanics of how this is going to play out in terms of actually moving forward with this funding bill. Republicans control the House, but Democrats control the Senate and the White House. So what do you expect to see here?
Look, the one thing I'll say about President Biden is that every time there has been a legislative fight with the Republicans, he winds up with their lunch sitting on his desk. Right? I mean, the Republicans, the Republicans talk a big game, and then in the end, the White House outmaneuvers them on nearly everything. Now, you're right. This is a funding bill, and so there are going to be a lot of pieces at stake, right? And so we'll see how it plays out. This is also a funding bill for 2025, right? So the Republicans have already cut the funding that we need for 2024. This is part of their effort to defund things going forward, because Donald Trump won't want free and fair elections in 2025, 2026 either. But the White House has a good track record of winning these fights, and so my money is on Joe Biden and the White House.
And let's finish off with this. What's your message to folks in the media, who's, by the way, to your earlier point, whose responsibility it is to cover this stuff, because it's not like anybody in the public would know about the intricacies of election administration and security funding. So what's your message to folks in the media who might not care enough about this issue to give it any attention?
Yeah, so look, there has become a sort of chic cosmopolitan cool that has taken over elites to say, oh, it's not that bad. Oh, it's just a bunch of people being alarmist. The real problem is excessive partisanship on both sides. We need to recognize that there are nuanced arguments here, and then we'll visit a diner. Okay, that is garbage. That is absolute garbage. The media elites in this country, the people who are preaching that the problem here is, both sides have their problems, are dooming our democracy. They are not doing their job. It is the job of every citizen, and journalists are citizens, to stand up and do the right thing. It is the job of journalists not to tell two sides of a story when there's only one. It is the job of journalists to not report on the things based on what is going to get them the most clicks, but what news is what people need to read. And people need to constantly be hearing about the never-ending assault that Republicans have on our democracy day after day. And cutting off money is cutting off the lifeblood of a free and fair electoral system.
Perfectly put. I would also just add that, there's so much worry about looking biased. You can be biased in favor of democracy. Right. This is a democracy issue. We're all on this plane. If this plane goes down, we all die. So journalists, citizens, journalists, everybody has a vested interest in making sure that this plane stays in the air, and funding our elections to the extent that they need to be funded is top among those issues. So with that said, again, for those watching right now, to support the work that Mark is doing, please make sure to sign up for Democracy Docket. I'll put the link right here on the screen and also in the post description of this video. I'm Brian Tyler Cohen.
I'm Marc Elias.
This is Democracy Watch.